Not everything that breaks you is meant to destroy you. I'm Christy. Welcome to the unraveling.
Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome back to Sacred Union Within. I'm Christy, and before we begin, I want to thank you for coming back. Last week, I shared the beautiful side of Kundalini awakening, the heart expansion, the overwhelming love, the way nature came alive, the bliss, the moments that are almost impossible to put into words. But when I finished recording that video, I realized something. If I stopped there, I wouldn't have been telling you the whole truth. Because as beautiful as my awakening eventually became, it also brought me to my knees. And I think that's the conversation we need to have today. Not to frighten anyone, not to convince you that awakening has to be painful, but because if you're in the middle of the storm, you deserve to know that someone else has survived it. There was a season of my life where I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. Not figuratively, but literally. I questioned everything. I questioned my sanity. I questioned my faith. I questioned my future, my decisions, my life, even my will to keep going. And looking back today, I can see that my old life was falling apart so something new could emerge. But when you're living it, it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like survival. So before we begin, I want to gently say this. My story is just that. My story. Not everyone experiences awakening in the same way, and intense emotional or physical symptoms can have many different causes. If you're ever concerned about your mental or physical health, please reach out to a qualified healthcare professional. Seeking support isn't a lack of faith or spirituality. Sometimes the most grounded thing we can do is ask for help. So today, I simply want to tell you about one chapter of my own journey. Because if you're sitting there wondering, why does this hurt so much? I want you to know you're not the only one who ever asked that question. If you watch my backstory, you know that my awakening was triggered through my twin flame connection. When that connection suddenly disappeared from my life, I believed that if I gave myself a month to grieve, I would be okay. I remember making a deal with myself. Christy, cry if you need to cry. Scream if you need to scream. But in a month, you will move on. A month came and went, and nothing changed. If anything, the pain became even more intense. It wasn't emotional pain the way I experienced heartbreak before. It felt physical. It felt as though someone had reached into my chest and was slowly pulling my heart apart. There were nights I would bury my face in my pillow and scream until I was too exhausted to keep crying. Not because I wanted attention and not because anyone was listening, but because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with the pain. Some of you will understand exactly what I mean. It felt too big for my body, too big for my words, too big for my understanding. During the day, I became very good at pretending. I would get up, go to work, smile, have conversations, do everything I needed to do. People saw the same Christy they always known, but they had no idea that every ounce of energy I had was going into simply holding myself together. The place where I finally allowed myself to fall apart was the bathtub. I spent hours taking a bath, multiple times a day. And not because baths magically fixed anything, but because water hid my tears. I would come out with red eyes and tell myself, hey, the water was just really, really hot today. It became my little secret, a place where I could grieve without having to explain grief that I couldn't even explain to myself. And every single day, sometimes 100 times a day, I prayed the same prayer. God, just please take him out of my system or take me. Looking back now, those words break my heart because I know how hopeless I felt. I know how convinced I was that the pain would never end. I know what it feels like to believe you will never smile again, not with your entire soul. And if that is where you are today, I wish I could reach through the screen and give you a big, big hug. Because while I can't promise your journey will look like mine, I can promise you this. The woman sitting here speaking to you today is living proof that the darkest chapter is not always the final one. I want to tell you about that part. There was another part of this journey that frightened me even more than grief. I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. At first, it was subtle, little things that didn't make sense. Moments where I'd suddenly know he was online before I even opened my phone. A feeling that he's just seen something I'd posted, and when I checked, he had. And I kept brushing it off as coincidence, wishful thinking, anything but what I was experiencing. But after the ghosting, everything intensified. Even though we weren't speaking, I couldn't stop feeling him. It was as though his presence had become woven into my everyday life, and no matter how desperately I wanted it to stop, it just wouldn't. I begged God every single day, please take him out of my system or take me. Because I couldn't understand how someone I hadn't seen in decades could feel so incredibly present. Then something even stranger began to happen. Every time I picked up my phone, I would hear his full name in my mind. Not once, not occasionally, but over and over again. He became so relentless that one day I actually spoke out loud. I know he exists, all right? You don't have to keep reminding me. Please just stop. It didn't stop. And looking back now, I can only describe it as one of the most confusing periods of my life. At that time, I had no framework for any of it. I wasn't studying Kundalini. I wasn't researching spiritual awakenings. I had never even heard the words twin flame. I just knew that something was happening that I couldn't explain. And that was terrifying. And I know I spoke about this already, but a little later, meditation became the only place where I found even a few moments of peace. And one day during meditation, I heard two words repeating over and over, which were twin flame, twin flame. I remember opening my eyes and thinking, what does that even mean? And a few days later, it happened again. And that was the first time I searched the words online. Now, wherever you see moments like these in spiritual experiences, intuition, the subconscious mind, making connections, or something else entirely, I think each of us has to approach them with both an open heart and grounded discernment. Our experiences are deeply personal, And if what you're going through ever feels frightening, overwhelming, or making you concerned for your well being, please reach out to someone you trust or to a qualified healthcare professional. Don't do what I did. We don't have to choose between spirituality and taking care of ourselves. The two can walk hand in hand. And looking back 9 years later, I no longer see that season as the time I was losing my mind. I see it as the season that forced me to question everything I thought I knew. And while I would never want to relive it again, trust me, I can finally look back with compassion for the woman who truly believed she was breaking apart because she had no idea she was slowly becoming someone entirely new. There were also moments where my body felt almost suspended. During meditation, I would sometimes feel so light that I genuinely questioned whether I was still sitting where I'd begun. I'd open my eyes just to reassure myself that I hadn't somehow drifted away. Whether that was an energetic experience, a deep meditative state, or something else entirely, I honestly don't know. I can only tell you what it felt like. And then there was the waves, heat moving through my body without warning, energy rising so suddenly it would stop me in my tracks. My hands would vibrate, my feet would vibrate. Sometimes it felt as though every energy center of my body had suddenly switched on. And other times it felt so overwhelmed by what was happening inside of me that all I could do was lie still and wait for it to pass. The hardest part wasn't the sensations themselves, it was not understanding them. No one had ever told me that profound transformation could be experienced in the body as well as the heart. So naturally, I wondered if something was wrong with me. Looking back now, I realize I spent so much of that season fighting what was happening. I wanted the pain to stop. I wanted my old life back. I wanted to wake up and feel normal again. But the more I resisted it, the more exhausted I became. It wasn't until much later that I began asking a different question. Not how do I make this go away, but what is this experience trying to teach me? That one question changed everything because instead of seeing my body as something that had betrayed me, I slowly began seeing it as something that was asking for my attention, for gentleness, for rest, for nourishment, for stillness, for compassion. It wasn't trying to punish me, it was asking me to listen. And while I would never want to relive those years, they taught me something I still carry with me today. Healing isn't always about pushing through. Sometimes healing begins the moment we stop fighting ourselves. And when I look back on those years, one of the hardest parts wasn't just the emotional pain, it was how invisible it was. From the outside, my life looked completely normal. I went to work, I smiled, I laughed when I was supposed to laugh, I told jokes when I was supposed to tell jokes. I showed up for my family. I cooked dinner every day. I folded laundry. I played with my kids. I did all the ordinary things that make up an ordinary life. And yet inside, I felt like I was living in the middle of an earthquake that no one else could feel. It was exhausting. Not just carrying the grief, but carrying the secret of it. How do you explain something you don't even understand yourself? How do you tell someone, I feel another person's presence every day. Or my heart feels like it's physically breaking. Or I have spent another night crying until I couldn't cry anymore. Whew, when you barely believe what you're saying yourself. So I didn't. I kept most of it to myself. Heck, I kept all of it to myself. The bathtub became my sanctuary. The pillow became my witness. God became the only one who truly knew every thought I was thinking. I remember coming out of the bath after crying for what it felt like hours. I'd look in the mirror, take a deep breath, wash my face, put some makeup on, tell myself, okay, girl, you got this. And then I would walk back into the world as though nothing had happened. I know there are people watching this who understand exactly what I'm talking about. The people around you see your smile, but they don't see the battle it took just to create it. Whew, if that's you, I want you to hear this. You're not weak because this feels heavy. You're not failing because you are struggling. And you don't have to pretend to be okay every moment of every day. One of the greatest lessons this journey taught me was that healing doesn't begin when we become stronger. It begins when we become honest. Honest with ourselves, honest with God, honest with someone safe enough to hold our story without trying to fix it. And looking back, I can see that I wasn't meant to carry all of it alone. And if I could sit beside the version of me who was quietly suffering in silence, I would tell her something I desperately needed to hear. You don't have to prove how strong you are. You only have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, one breath, one day, one prayer at a time. Because that's exactly how I made it through. Not by having all the answers, but by taking the next small step. Even on the days when that was all I had to give. So looking back, I can also see something I couldn't see while I was living through it. Even in my darkest moments, I was never completely alone. Around that time, someone came into my life through work, a colleague. But almost immediately, it felt as though we had known each other for much longer. There was an instant sense of familiarity. Just looking into his eyes, I knew I saw those eyes before. There was a sense of trust, a sense of safety, and before long we started calling each other brother and sister. He had a way of listening that was incredibly rare. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He didn't make me feel like I was too much. He simply held space. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another human being isn't advice, but its presence. There were days when I laughed so hard that I cried. And after months of feeling like I'd forgotten how to laugh, that was healing in itself. He reminded me that life still held moments of joy, that even in the middle of heartbreak, light could still find its way in. Looking back now, I believe people come into our lives for seasons and for reasons. His season in my life eventually came to an end. His work contract finished and we went our separate ways. But what he gave me stayed. The reminder that kindness matters. And being deeply listened to can be healing. That sometimes God answers our prayers not by removing our pain, but by sending someone to help us carry it for a little while. Years later, after reconnecting with my twin, I found something that surprised me. I began recognizing some of those same beautiful qualities in him: the protectiveness, the playfulness, the quiet strength, the ability to simply be present. And that made me smile because I realized those qualities have been preparing me all along. Not to depend on another person, but to recognize what healthy, grounded masculine energy could feel like. And more importantly, this journey taught me that those qualities also live within us. We all have the inner masculine, the part of us that protects, the part of us that creates safety, the part of us that steadies us when life feels chaotic. And for so long, I searched outside myself for stability, only to discover that awakening was gently teaching me to build it within. And perhaps that was one of the greatest gifts of all. So, beautiful soul, if you've listened to this entire video, first of all, thank you. Thank you for trusting me with one of the most vulnerable chapters of my life. For many years, I didn't know what to call what I had been through. I only knew that it changed me. And today I call it part of my Kundalini awakening. Someone else may describe similar experiences differently, and that's okay. The label was never the most important part to me. The healing was. If there's one thing I hope you take away from my story, is this: please don't measure your awakening by someone else's experience. Some people experience profound physical sensations, others don't. Some people have vivid dreams or moments of deep intuition. Others experience quiet, gradual change over many years. Neither path is more spiritual than the other. Your journey is your own. I also want to say something to the person who may be watching this through tears, the one who's exhausted, the one who's questioning everything, the one who's wondering if they'll ever feel like themselves again. I see you, my friend. I may not know your story, but I know what it feels like to wonder if the pain will ever end. And I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me: keep going. Not because tomorrow will magically fix everything, but because healing has a way of happening so quietly that sometimes we don't even notice it until we look back. One day you will laugh again. One day music will make you smile instead of cry. One day you will realize you've gone hours, maybe even days, without carrying the same unbearable weight. And one day you will look back at the person you used to be with so much compassion. Not because she was weak, oh no, because she kept going when she thought she couldn't. If your experience ever feels overwhelming, frightening, or unlike anything you can safely navigate on your own, please don't carry that burden in silence. Reach out to someone you trust and to a qualified healthcare professional. Caring for your mental, emotional, and physical well being is not separate from your spiritual journey, it is a part of it. If my story resonated with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Not because our stories need to be identical, but because sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the simple reminder: you're not the only one. And if you know someone who's quietly walking through a season like this, perhaps share this video with them. It might help them feel seen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me to share my heart with yours. And until next time, sweet soul, please be gentle with yourself. Be patient with your healing. Trust that even in the moments that feel impossible, light is still finding its way to you. And as always, keep returning to your sacred union within. I love you all. I'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye now.
You're not here by accident. Your soul knew. We'll meet again right here between the lines.